The rusted eviction notice fluttered against the apartment door like a death certificate, while inside, a woman held her husband's hand as he whispered through tears that their children had emptied their savings account and disappeared. 3 weeks later, they would stand before a collapsed barn in rural Montana, wondering if the inheritance from a cousin they'd never met would be their salvation or their final undoing. Before we dive into this story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. Harold Whitman's fingers trembled as he traced the faded numbers on the bank statement one more time. 0. After 47 years of careful saving, meticulous budgeting, and countless sacrifices, the account that held their life savings showed nothing but zeros. Beside him on their threadbare couch, Eleanor clutched a coffee mug with both hands, her knuckles white against the ceramic, her eyes fixed on something far beyond the peeling wallpaper of their Cincinnati apartment. "They cleaned us out," Harold finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Every penny. The betrayal had come from the two people they'd trusted most in the world. Their son Marcus, a financial advisor with a prestigious downtown firm, had convinced them 6 months earlier to give him power of attorney. "It's just practical planning, Dad," he'd said, his smile warm and reassuring. "With you turning 75 and Mom's arthritis getting worse, you need someone who can handle things if there's an emergency." Their daughter Patricia had agreed enthusiastically. "Marcus knows all about investments and retirement planning," she'd added during that fateful Sunday dinner. "You've worked so hard your whole lives. Let us help you enjoy your golden years." Golden years. The phrase now tasted bitter in Harold's mouth as he remembered signing those papers, feeling grateful that his successful children wanted to ease their burden. He'd spent 35 years as a high school shop teacher, carefully setting aside money each month. Eleanor had worked nights as a hospital admissions clerk while raising their children. Every overtime hour translated into their nest egg. They'd driven the same car for 15 years, patched clothes instead of buying new ones, skipped vacations to pay for their children's college educations. "Maybe there's an explanation," Eleanor said, though her voice carried no conviction. "Maybe they moved it to another account for safety." Harold shook his head. He'd already called the bank, visited in person, spoken to 3 different managers. The money had been transferred out in a series of transactions over the past 2 months. Cashier's checks made out to Marcus, wire transfers to accounts they couldn't trace, all perfectly legal with power of attorney. The apartment around them seemed to mock their predicament. They'd moved here 5 years ago, downsizing from their family home to free up equity for what they thought would be a comfortable retirement. The 1-bedroom unit was clean but worn, with windows that rattled in winter winds and radiators that clanged like ghost chains. They'd planned to move somewhere nicer once they fully retired, maybe one of those senior communities with a pool and activities. Now they couldn't even afford this place. Eleanor set down her mug with shaking hands and reached for the phone. "I'm calling Marcus. There has to be a mistake." She dialed the number they'd called 1,000 times over the years. For birthday wishes, holiday plans, proud announcements of promotions, and grandchildren's achievements. The automated message that greeted her was like a slap across the face. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Try Patricia," Harold suggested, though dread was already settling in his stomach like a cold stone. Same message. Both numbers disconnected. Eleanor's hands trembled as she set the phone in its cradle. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of understanding crushing down on them. This wasn't a mistake or miscommunication. Their children had deliberately, methodically stolen their life savings and vanished. "The apartment office called yesterday," Harold said quietly. "We're 2 months behind on rent. They want payment by the end of the week or they'll start eviction proceedings." Eleanor's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she pressed her palms against her eyes. "How could they do this to us? We gave them everything, every opportunity, every advantage we could manage." Harold pulled her close, his own eyes burning. Marcus had been such a bright boy, always at the top of his class. They'd been so proud when he got into Northwestern, even though the tuition meant taking out a second mortgage. Patricia had been their artist, their dreamer. They'd supported her through 3 career changes, always believing she'd find her path. We need to think practically, Harold said, forcing his voice to steady. I'll go to the school district tomorrow, see if they need substitute teachers. You could check with the hospital about part-time work. Harold, you retired 3 years ago because of your back and my hands. Eleanor flexed her arthritic fingers, wincing at the movement. Who's going to hire us at our age? They spent the rest of the day making phone calls that led nowhere. The police listened sympathetically, but explained that with power of attorney, no crime had been committed. A legal aid lawyer confirmed what they feared. Pursuing civil action would take money they didn't have and likely yield nothing since their children had clearly planned this carefully. Friends from their old neighborhood expressed shock but could offer little beyond sympathy. Most were on fixed incomes themselves, struggling with their own challenges. As darkness fell over Cincinnati, they sat at their small kitchen table with a notebook, listing their few assets. Harold's pension provided $1,847 monthly. Social Security added another $1,210. Against that stood rent of $1,100, utilities, groceries, medications for Harold's blood pressure, and Eleanor's arthritis. Even with severe cuts, the math didn't work. They'd be homeless within 2 months. We could sell the car, Eleanor suggested. It's 12 years old with 150,000 miles. Maybe we'd get 2,000, enough to buy us an extra month. They'd already sold everything valuable over the years. Eleanor's mother's jewelry to help Marcus with a down payment on his first house. Harold's father's pocket watch collection to pay for Patricia's wedding. The furniture in their apartment was mostly secondhand, worth pennies on the dollar. That night, they lay awake in their narrow bed, holding each other like survivors of a shipwreck. Outside, sirens wailed through the city streets, and somewhere in the building, a baby cried. Harold stared at the ceiling, his mind cycling through increasingly desperate scenarios. Maybe they could find a homeless shelter that would take elderly couples. Maybe there were government programs they didn't know about. Maybe. Harold, Eleanor whispered in the darkness. What did we do wrong? Nothing, he said fiercely. We loved them. We provided for them. We taught them right from wrong, or thought we did. Then why? He had no answer. The children who'd made construction paper cards for Mother's Day, who'd proudly shown off science fair projects, who'd clung to them at the bus stop on the first day of school. How had those children become adults capable of such calculated cruelty? Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of empty bank vaults and phones that rang but no one answered. Harold woke at 3 a.m. with his back spasming, reaching for pain medication before remembering they'd need to ration what remained. He couldn't afford refills without insurance, and Medicare Part D had gaps that seemed to widen every year. The next 3 days passed in a blur of humiliation and closed doors. The school district had a hiring freeze. The hospital had outsourced admissions to a company that used younger workers at minimum wage. Even grocery stores wanted employees who could stand for 8-hour shifts and lift heavy boxes. Their age, which should have brought respect and wisdom, instead marked them as unemployable. We're invisible, Eleanor said after another fruitless day. Worse than invisible, we're disposable. On Thursday morning, Harold found the eviction notice taped to their door. 30 days to vacate. The paper trembled in his hands as he read the legal language that reduced their crisis to bureaucratic procedure. Eleanor stood beside him, her face pale but set with determination. We're not giving up, she said. We survived the recession in '81 when you were laid off. We survived my cancer scare in '95. We'll survive this. But, privately, they both wondered how. Their generation had been raised to believe that hard work and sacrifice would be rewarded, that children cared for aging parents, that growing old in America meant security, not abandonment. Every assumption had proven false. That evening, as they picked at a dinner of rice and canned beans, protein stretched as far as possible, the phone rang. They both froze. Harold answered with trembling hope, but the voice on the other end was unfamiliar. Mr. Harold Whitman, this is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates law firm in Helena, Montana. I'm calling regarding the estate of Samuel Whitman. Harold frowned. I don't know any Samuel Whitman. He was your father's cousin, sir. Lived outside Whitefish his whole life. I'm sorry to inform you that he passed away last month, but you're named in his will as his sole beneficiary." Harold sank into a kitchen chair, his mind struggling to process this information. He vaguely remembered his father mentioning a cousin out west, but they'd never met. His father had been dead for 20 years. What kind of beneficiary? He asked cautiously. After recent events, he'd lost the ability to trust good news. "Mr. Samuel Whitman left you his property, 40 acres with a farmhouse and several outbuildings. There's also a small sum of money, approximately $8,000 after estate, taxes, and fees." Eleanor gripped Harold's shoulder, her fingers digging in with desperate hope. "The property?" Harold said slowly. "What condition is it in?" There was a pause. "I'll be honest, Mr. Whitman. Your cousin was something of a hermit. He lived alone for the last 30 years after his wife died, and maintenance wasn't a priority. The house needs substantial work, but the land is clear of debt, and it's yours if you want it." Harold covered the phone and looked at Eleanor. In her eyes, he saw the same thought reflected. What choice did they have? Stay here and face homelessness, or gamble on an unknown property 3 states away? "We'll take it," he said. The lawyer promised to send documents by express mail and gave them directions to his office in Helena. After hanging up, Harold and Eleanor sat in stunned silence. Then Eleanor began to laugh, a sound caught between hysteria and relief. "A hermit's broken-down farmhouse in Montana," she said. "It's not exactly the retirement we planned." "No," Harold agreed, "but it's shelter, and it's ours. No one can take it from us." They spent the next week in frantic preparation. The car, old as it was, would have to make the 2,000-mile journey. They sold what little furniture they had to a second-hand store for $300. Clothes, dishes, and essentials went into boxes scrounged from behind the grocery store. Everything else, photo albums, Harold's teaching awards, Eleanor's collection of birthday cards from grandchildren who now wouldn't know their address, went into 2 suitcases. The morning they left Cincinnati, Harold stopped at their bank one last time. He closed their account, taking the remaining $247 in cash. The teller, a young woman who reminded him painfully of Patricia at that age, wished them well on their move. "Starting fresh," Eleanor told her with forced brightness. "Adventure at any age, right?" As they drove through the city limits, Eleanor reached over and took Harold's hand. "No looking back," she said. "No looking back," he agreed, though the rear-view mirror seemed to hold the weight of every memory they were leaving behind. The journey to Montana took 4 days, their pace limited by the car's age and their need to conserve gas money. They slept in the car at rest stops, backs aching from the awkward positions, and subsisted on peanut butter sandwiches and truck stop coffee. Through Illinois and Iowa, the flat expanses of farmland seemed to mock their situation. All this space in America, and they'd nearly been homeless. In South Dakota, the car's radiator began overheating. Harold nursed it along with frequent stops, adding water from gas station hoses, praying it would last. Eleanor navigated with an old road atlas, finding the cheapest gas stations, calculating miles per gallon with the intensity of a NASA engineer. "Remember our honeymoon?" she asked as they crossed into Wyoming. "That little motel in the Badlands? You wore that yellow sundress," Harold recalled. "I thought I was the luckiest man alive." "You still are," she said firmly. "We still have each other." As the Rocky Mountains rose before them, magnificent and terrifying, the landscape transformed from prairie to peaks. The car wheezed up steep grades, temperature gauge hovering dangerously close to red. Harold's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his back screaming from tension and old injury, but he pressed on. There was no choice but forward. They reached Helena on a Tuesday afternoon, exhausted and down to their last $40. James Morrison's law office occupied a historic building downtown, all brick and tall windows. The lawyer himself was younger than they'd expected, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm glad you made it safely," he said, showing them into his office. "I have the deed and keys here, along with the cashier's check for the monetary bequest." He spread papers across his desk, explaining terms and conditions, but Harold barely heard him. $8,000. It seemed like a fortune after their recent terror, though he knew it wouldn't go far toward making a derelict property livable. About the condition of the house, Morrison said carefully, "I want to make sure you understand what you're taking on. Samuel lived simply, to put it mildly. The property hasn't had significant maintenance in decades." "We understand," Eleanor said. "We're not afraid of work." Morrison studied them, taking in their obvious age and Eleanor's swollen knuckles. "The nearest town is Whitefish, about 12 miles from the property. There's a smaller community, Deer Creek, about 5 miles away. Just a general store and post office, really?" He handed over a manila envelope thick with keys and papers. "These are Samuel's records, such as they are. Utility information, property surveys, that sort of thing. The electricity was shut off years ago, but there's a well and septic system. Whether they're functional." He shrugged. They signed papers, shook hands, and emerged into the Montana afternoon with the deed to 40 acres they'd never seen. Harold folded the cashier's check carefully into his wallet, the first money they'd had beyond daily survival in weeks. "Should we find a motel tonight?" Eleanor asked. "Rest before we see it?" Harold calculated quickly. Motel, meals, gas to the property, every dollar spent was one less for repairs. "Let's at least look today. We can decide after we see what we're dealing with." They stopped at a bank to deposit the check, keeping out $1,000 in cash, then found a grocery store to stock up on essentials: bread, canned goods, bottled water, batteries, flashlights, preparing for uncertainty. Eleanor added a bottle of wine to the cart. "For celebration or commiseration," she said. "Either way, we'll need it." The drive from Helena to Whitefish took them deeper into Montana's raw beauty. Mountains surrounded them, snow-capped even in late spring, while valleys spread green and wide between peaks. They passed ranches with cattle grazing, small towns that seemed frozen in time, and vast stretches where nature ruled unopposed. Whitefish itself surprised them, a tourist town with art galleries and restaurants mixed among practical businesses. They found the turnoff Morrison had described, a county road heading east into the mountains. Pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt rutted by spring rains. "Samuel certainly valued his privacy," Harold muttered, wrestling the car around potholes that threatened to swallow a tire. 5 miles in, they found the next turn, barely a track between pine trees, marked only by a rusted mailbox with S. Whitman painted in fading letters. The car lurched and protested up the narrow lane, branches scraping both sides like fingernails on metal. Harold's jaw was clenched so tight, his teeth ached, but he pressed forward. They'd come too far to turn back. The trees opened suddenly into a clearing, and there it was. Harold stopped the car, and they sat in silence, absorbing the reality of their inheritance. The farmhouse squatted like a wounded animal against the backdrop of mountains. 2 stories of weathered wood and broken dreams. Its roof sagged in the middle, as if carrying the weight of decades. Windows were boarded over or broken, giving the structure a blind, defeated look. The front porch had partially collapsed, leaving steps that led to a 4-foot drop. To the left stood a barn that had lost its fight with gravity, walls leaning at impossible angles. Roof open to the sky in several places. Various outbuildings dotted the property in states of decay. A chicken coop overtaken by blackberry vines, a tool shed with no door, something that might have been a garage before time and weather claimed it. But the land, oh, the land was magnificent. 40 acres of meadow and forest, with a stream visible in the distance, catching afternoon light like scattered diamonds. Mountains rose on 3 sides, protective and eternal. Wildflowers dotted the unmowed grass, purple lupines, yellow balsam root, pink wild roses climbing over fence posts. "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered. "The land is," Harold agreed. "The house." They climbed out, bodies stiff from the journey, and approached their new home. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, but opened to Harold's push. The smell hit them first. Must, decay, and something wild, as if the forest had been slowly reclaiming the interior. Late afternoon light filtered through gaps in the boarded windows, revealing a front room that might have been pleasant once. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its chimney hopefully intact. Wooden floors showed through layers of dirt and debris. Furniture remained. A couch that mice had colonized, chairs thick with dust, a dining table solid under the grime. They picked their way carefully through the house, testing floorboards that creaked ominously. The kitchen was a disaster of outdated appliances and hanging cabinet doors, but the sink was porcelain, old-fashioned, and deep. No electricity. As Morrison had warned, candles and oil lamps on every surface suggested how Samuel had lived his last years. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom that belonged in a museum. The toilet had a pull chain, the clawfoot tub was ringed with rust, but the fixtures were solid under the neglect. In what must have been the master bedroom, they found signs of Samuel's life, clothes still in the closet, books stacked on every surface, a pair of reading glasses on the nightstand, as if waiting for their owner's return. "He died alone here," Eleanor said softly. "No family except us, and we never knew him." They stood at the broken window, looking out at their land as shadows lengthened toward evening. The task before them seemed insurmountable. A derelict house, no electricity, questionable plumbing, and 2 bodies already worn by age and recent hardship. "We can't stay here tonight," Harold said, "not without water or power to see by." Eleanor nodded, but neither moved to leave. Despite everything, something about the place called to them. Perhaps it was the peace after weeks of crisis, or the knowledge that this land was theirs, free and clear. No bank could foreclose, no children could steal it, no landlord could evict them. "Tomorrow," Eleanor said. "We'll come back tomorrow and start." They drove back down the mountain in gathering darkness, finding a modest motel in Whitefish that didn't strain their careful budget. After showers that felt like luxury, they sat on the bed with paper and pencil, making lists. "First priority has to be water," Harold said. "If the well works and the pump can be fixed or replaced, everything else becomes possible." "Electric next," Eleanor added. "We'll need to check if the lines are even run to the property anymore. Then basic repairs to make one room livable while we work on the rest." They planned late into the night, breaking down the impossible into merely difficult. Harold's construction knowledge from teaching shop for 35 years would be crucial. Eleanor's practical nursing training would help them work safely despite their physical limitations. They had $8,000. Not much for the scale of work needed, but enough to begin if they were careful and creative. "You know what's strange?" Eleanor said as they finally prepared for sleep. "I feel more hopeful tonight than I have in months. We've lost so much, been betrayed so badly. But right now I feel like we might actually make it." Harold pulled her close. "We will make it. We have to. That farmhouse is going to be our home, Ellie. Our last stand, maybe, but ours." They returned the next morning, armed with supplies from Whitefish's hardware store. Work gloves, basic tools, cleaning supplies, camping equipment for temporary shelter. The clerk, a weathered man named Tom, had been helpful once he learned they'd inherited the Whitman place. Old Sam was a character, he'd said. Came to town maybe once a month, always paid cash, never said more than necessary, but honest as daylight. Sorry to hear he passed. "Did you know him well?" Eleanor asked. "Nobody knew Sam well, but I remember when his wife was alive. That place was something then. Mary had gardens that folks would drive out just to see. Apple orchards, too. Of course, that was 30 years back. Now, standing again before the farmhouse in morning light, they could almost see shadows of that former glory. Overgrown fruit trees dotted the property. What might have been garden beds lay buried under grass and weeds. The bones of beauty remained under the neglect. Harold started with the well house, a small structure near the main house that protected the pump and pressure tank. The door fell off at his touch, revealing equipment that looked ancient but potentially functional. The pressure tank was rusted but intact. The pump, an old jet model, might work if they could restore power to it. "Good news," he called to Eleanor. "The basic system is here. Bad news is, we need electricity to test it." Eleanor had started on the house's front room, armed with broom and determination. Years of dirt and animal droppings required removal before they could even assess what might be salvageable. She worked steadily despite the arthritis that made gripping the broom handle painful, taking breaks to rest her hands but always returning to the task. By noon, they'd made visible progress. The front room floor was clear, revealing hardwood that might be beautiful again with work. Harold had traced the electrical lines from the road. They were intact but disconnected at the meter. A call to the power company would be needed. Inspections required. Deposits paid. They ate lunch on the broken porch, sandwiches, and bottled water with a view of their land that no restaurant could match. An eagle circled overhead, riding thermals above the meadow. Somewhere in the forest, a woodpecker hammered its rhythm. "We'll need to prioritize," Harold said. "Power first. Without it, we can't test the well or have lights to work by. Then water. Then we focus on making the kitchen and one bedroom livable." "What about the roof?" Eleanor pointed to the visible sag. "If that goes, nothing else matters. We'll need professionals for that. Maybe we can patch the worst spots ourselves to buy time." He calculated mentally. "A new roof could eat our entire budget. We need to be creative." They worked until exhaustion forced them to stop, accomplishing more than seemed possible for two people their age. Back at the motel, they soaked aching muscles and compared notes. Eleanor had found good news in the kitchen. The stove was propane, and the tank outside might still have fuel. Harold had discovered that the foundation was solid. No signs of serious structural damage beyond the roof. The next morning brought their first real victory. After multiple phone calls and a deposit that hurt to pay, the power company scheduled a reconnection for the following week. The clerk warned that the house would need an electrical inspection before full service could be restored, but they could at least get temporary construction power to test systems. Days blended into a rhythm of work and discovery. They'd arrive each morning with new supplies, labor until their bodies demanded rest, then return to the motel to plan the next day's assault. Slowly, incrementally, the farmhouse began to yield to their efforts. The propane tank, miraculously, was half full and functional once Harold replaced the regulator. The kitchen stove sputtered to life, 40 years old but built to last. This meant they could heat water, cook meals, and save money by spending full days at the property. When the power company arrived, Harold held his breath as they threw the switch. The pump house hummed to life, and after much sputtering and brown water, clear liquid flowed from the kitchen tap. Eleanor actually cried at the sight. "Running water," she said. "You don't appreciate it until it's gone." But the electrical inspection brought bad news. The house's wiring was decades out of code. Some of it still the cloth-wrap style from the 1942. The inspector condemned it on the spot. Full rewiring would cost thousands they didn't have. "We can run extension cords from the pump house for now," Harold said that evening, fighting despair. "It's not safe for permanent living, but it'll give us lights and power tools to keep working." Eleanor touched his weathered hand. "One problem at a time, remember? We've come this far." They moved from the motel to camping in the house, setting up their tent in the cleaned front room where the roof was sound. It saved precious dollars and let them work longer days. Mornings were cold at elevation, their breath visible as they crawled from sleeping bags. But coffee on the propane stove and sunshine through newly cleaned windows made it bearable. The first month passed in a blur of small victories and setbacks. They'd cleared and cleaned the entire first floor, discovering hardwood floors that glowed when scrubbed. The kitchen, while dated, proved functional once they replaced broken cabinet hinges and scrubbed decades of grease from surfaces. They found a cast-iron clawfoot tub under the rust upstairs that cleaned up beautifully. But money hemorrhaged faster than they'd imagined. Every repair revealed two more needed. The roof leaked in a dozen places. Windows were rotted and wouldn't close properly. The chimney needed cleaning before the fireplace was safe to use. Their $8,000 dropped to $6,000, then $5,000, then $4,000 as summer arrived in the mountains. "We need income," Harold said one evening, reviewing their dwindling funds. "The house won't be livable before winter without more money." Eleanor nodded. She'd been thinking the same, but hadn't wanted to voice it. At their age, in a place where they knew no one, what work could they find? The answer came from an unexpected source. They'd been shopping at the general store in Deer Creek, the tiny community 5 miles from their property, when the owner, Mabel Patterson, struck up a conversation. "You're the folks fixing up the Whitman place," she said. It wasn't a question. News traveled in small communities. "How's it coming?" They shared their progress and challenges, and Mabel listened with interest. She was perhaps 70 herself, with sharp eyes behind thick glasses and hands that moved constantly, straightening merchandise while they talked. "My husband Roy and I have run this store for 40 years, she said. "But his health isn't good anymore. I could use help a few days a week if you're interested. Nothing fancy. Stocking shelves, running the register when I need breaks, minimum wage. But it's something." Eleanor accepted immediately. The work would be easier on her arthritis than constant house renovation, and any income would help stretch their savings. Harold found opportunity through Tom at the hardware store in Whitefish. Word of his craftsmanship had spread as he'd special-ordered materials and discussed repair techniques. A local contractor needed an experienced Finnish carpenter for a custom home project. "Can't do the heavy lifting anymore," Harold explained, "but I can handle detail work, trim, cabinetry, that sort of thing." "That's exactly what I need," the contractor, Bill Morrison, replied. "My regular Finnish guy moved to Bozeman, pays $25 an hour. And you set your own pace as long as the work's quality." Between Eleanor's store work and Harold's carpentry, they brought in enough to continue the house renovation while building connections in the community. Mabel proved a font of local knowledge, sharing stories of the area's history and connecting them with resources they'd never have found alone. "There's a man up Beaver Creek who salvages building materials," she mentioned one day. "Might have windows that would fit your place. Tell him I sent you. He'll give you a fair price." The salvager, Ernest Blackwell, turned out to be a Vietnam veteran living off-grid in a cabin surrounded by carefully organized architectural salvage. He walked their property, assessing needs with an expert eye. "I've got 6 double-hung windows from a house demolition in Kalispell," he said. "Same era as yours, good condition. Trade you straight up for clearing that fallen barn wood. I can always sell old barn board to city folks wanting that rustic look." It took Harold and Eleanor 3 days of careful work to dismantle the collapsed barn, saving usable lumber and stacking it for Ernest. Their bodies protested every minute, but the windows he provided were worth $1,000 they didn't have. More importantly, the connection led to others. Ernest's nephew, who did electrical work on the side, a retired plumber who'd help for cash and home-cooked meals, a roofing crew that would patch the worst spots in exchange for Eleanor's famous apple pies, and a modest fee. Summer in Montana revealed the property's hidden gifts. The old fruit trees, pruned of dead wood, produced small but sweet apples. Wild raspberries grew along the stream, and Eleanor discovered herbs that Mary Whitman had planted still thriving among the weeds: sage, thyme, oregano, and mint that had naturalized over the decades. The stream itself became their refuge after hard days of labor. Clear mountain water over smooth stones, cold enough to numb aching feet, with pools deep enough to soak tired bodies. They'd sit on the bank in late afternoon light, watching trout rise for insects, while eagles circled overhead. "We're gonna make it," Eleanor said one such evening, her feet in the water, Harold's arm around her shoulders. "The house, you mean?" "Everything. The house. Us. This new life. I can feel it working, Harold, like we're supposed to be here." He understood what she meant. Despite the hardship, something had shifted in both of them. The betrayal that had driven them from Cincinnati felt distant now, overshadowed by daily progress and growing community. They'd found purpose in resurrecting the farmhouse, strength in conquering each challenge, and most surprisingly, joy in their shared labor. Challenges will test us, their determination at all costs. In August, Harold slipped from a ladder while patching roof holes, wrenching his back badly enough to require a week of rest. Their carefully hoarded funds took another hit from the doctor visit and muscle relaxants. Eleanor's hands swelled so badly some mornings she couldn't hold a coffee cup, let alone work her shifts at the store. But they adapted, Harold doing her heavy lifting on bad days, Eleanor becoming his hands when his back spasmed. The electrical nephew Ernest had recommended gave them a quote for rewiring, $4,800 for materials and labor, less than half the going rate but still beyond their means. They were contemplating a winter with extension cords and fire hazards when Mabel made an unexpected proposal. "Roy and I have been talking," she said one morning at the store. "We want to sell this place and move closer to our daughter in Missoula, but not to just anyone. It needs to stay in local hands, keep serving the community." Eleanor's heart sank. Losing this job would hurt their fragile stability. "We'd like to offer it to you two," Mabel continued. "Owner financed, payments you could manage with the store's income. You could live in the apartment upstairs until your farmhouse is ready." The offer stunned them. The store was the heart of Deer Creek, a gathering place and vital service for scattered rural residents. The apartment, while small, had electricity, plumbing, and heat, luxuries their farmhouse still lacked. "Why us?" Harold asked when they visited to discuss details. "You barely know us." Roy, thin and fragile but sharp-eyed, answered from his recliner. "We've watched how you work, how you treat people. You show up every day. You're honest. You're becoming part of this place whether you realize it or not. That's what the store needs, owners who see it as more than profit." They negotiated terms that worked for everyone. Harold and Eleanor would take over the store in September, making monthly payments from its income. They'd move into the upstairs apartment for winter, while continuing farmhouse repairs as weather allowed. Mabel and Roy would stay through October to train them in the business's quirks and introduce them to suppliers and customers. The universe seemed to be conspiring to help them succeed. What happens next will turn their world upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The day they signed papers for the store, Eleanor found Harold on the farmhouse's repaired front porch, tears streaming down his weathered face. "What's wrong?" she asked, alarmed. "Nothing," he said, pulling her close. "Everything's right. That's why I'm crying. 6 months ago, we were about to be homeless. Our children had stolen everything. I thought we were finished, Ellie. Now look at us. We have a home we're rebuilding with our own hands, a business, a community. I never expected to feel hope again." She held him as his shoulders shook, understanding completely. They'd been so focused on survival, on the next task and the next problem, that the magnitude of their transformation had crept up unnoticed. From discarded and dismissed to needed and valued. From isolated and betrayed to connected and trusted. From ending to beginning, September brought golden light to the mountains and their move to the store apartment. It felt strange leaving the farmhouse after months of camping in its evolving rooms. But practicality won. Mountain winters were harsh, and the house still lacked proper heating beyond the fireplace. The apartment was tiny but warm, with a view of the mountains from its kitchen window and the convenience of indoor plumbing that never froze. Running the store proved both challenging and rewarding. Eleanor's warmth drew customers who lingered to chat, sharing local news and needs. Harold's fix-it skills meant he could repair the ancient cash register, tune up the refrigeration units, and solve countless small problems that kept costs down. They learned the rhythms of rural retail, busy mornings as ranchers grabbed supplies, quiet afternoons, perfect for stocking shelves, evening rushes when folks stopped by after work. The store became their window into the community they were joining. They met the young couple struggling to make their organic farm profitable, the retired teacher who tutored local children for free, and the Iraq veteran who raised therapy horses for fellow veterans with PTSD. Each had a story, and gradually Harold and Eleanor became part of those stories. The couple who'd lost everything and chose to begin again rather than surrender. Weekends, they returned to the farmhouse, making progress that would have seemed glacial to younger bodies, but felt monumental to them. By October, they'd completed one bedroom, installed a wood stove for heat, and upgraded enough electrical to eliminate the extension cords. The bathroom, with its gloriously restored clawfoot tub, was functional, if not beautiful. The kitchen remained a work in progress, but it was clean, operational, and somehow charming with its mix of original features and salvaged additions. The first snow came early, mid-October, transforming their property into a wonderland that took their breath away. They stood on the porch. They'd rebuilt board by board, watching fat flakes blanket the meadow and forest. The mountains disappeared into low clouds, making their valley feel intimate and protected. "I need to tell you something," Eleanor said, her breath visible in the cold air. "I found a lump in my breast last week." The words hit Harold like a physical blow. After everything they'd survived, overcome, and built, this felt like cosmic cruelty. He pulled her against him, feeling her trembling that had nothing to do with temperature. "Have you seen a doctor?" "Appointments tomorrow in Whitefish. I didn't want to worry you until I knew something, but I couldn't face it alone." They held each other in the snow, two people who'd weathered so many storms, now facing perhaps their greatest challenge. The farmhouse stood behind them, testament to their resilience and determination. But would it be enough? The doctor, a young woman named Sarah Chen, was thorough and kind. The lump was concerning enough to warrant immediate biopsy. The wait for results would be 5 days, 5 days that stretched like eternity. They ran the store, worked on the house, and pretended normalcy while fear gnawed at their foundations. When the call came, Eleanor took it in the store's back room, while Harold minded the register. He watched through the doorway as she listened, her face revealing nothing. When she hung up and met his eyes, her smile told him everything. "Benign," she said, "just a cyst. They'll remove it next month, but it's not cancer." Harold abandoned the register to hold her, both of them crying with relief in the storeroom, surrounded by canned goods and paper towels. A customer's cough brought them back to reality, but the reprieve felt like a second chance at their second chance. Winter settled over northwest Montana with serious intent. Snow piled to the windows of the store apartment, and temperatures dropped to levels that made Cincinnati seem tropical. But they were warm, fed, and together. The store provided steady, if modest, income. The community embraced them as full members, no longer newcomers, but neighbors. They hosted their first Thanksgiving in the apartment, inviting others who might be alone. Ernest the salvager, the young organic farming couple, and the veteran with therapy horses. Eleanor cooked on the apartment's tiny stove, producing a feast that defied spatial limitations. Harold had crafted a table extension from barnwood, and they squeezed 8 people around it, sharing food and stories while snow fell outside. "What are you thankful for?" Eleanor asked as they went around the table. The answers varied: health, horses, good neighbors, surviving another year. When Harold's turn came, he looked at Eleanor, then at their gathered friends. "I'm thankful for betrayal," he said, surprising everyone. "If our children hadn't stolen our savings, if we hadn't been evicted, we'd never have come here, never found this place, these people, this life. So I'm thankful for the worst thing that ever happened to us, because it led to the best." Eleanor squeezed his hand under the table, understanding perfectly. They'd been broken down to nothing, and in that breaking, found what truly mattered. Christmas approached with its own challenges. The store grew busy as locals shopped for gifts and supplies to weather potential storms. Harold built a wooden toy display featuring handcrafted items from local artisans, including some of his own carved animals. Eleanor organized a cookie exchange that brought together far-flung neighbors and filled the store with warmth and sweetness. On Christmas Eve, as they prepared to close early, a car pulled up outside, unusual for the late hour. A woman emerged, well-dressed but hesitant, studying the store's humble exterior. When she entered, Eleanor's greeting died in her throat. Patricia stood in the doorway, their daughter transformed by guilt and time. Designer clothes couldn't hide the shadows under her eyes or the nervous way she clutched her purse. "Mom," she said. "Dad, I've been looking for you for months." Harold emerged from the back room, and his face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, and finally a weary sadness. "Patricia," he said simply. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Please? I know I don't deserve it, but please." They flipped the store sign to closed and led her upstairs to the apartment. Patricia looked around the tiny space, taking in the second-hand furniture, the wood stove, the obvious poverty compared to what they'd once had. "This is where you live?" she asked. "This is where we thrive," Eleanor corrected. "Why are you here, Patricia?" Their daughter sank onto the worn couch, looking older than her 38 years. "Marcus is in prison," she said. "Fraud. He didn't just steal from you. He took from other clients too. The FBI got involved. He's looking at 15 years. Harold felt no satisfaction at the news, only a deep tiredness. And you? I didn't know at first, Patricia said. I swear I didn't. He told me you'd agreed to let him invest the money, that you were being taken care of. By the time I realized, I was in too deep. He'd put some of the money in my accounts, made me complicit. So you're here because you're scared, Eleanor said, not because you're sorry. I'm here because I'm both, Patricia admitted. I've lost everything, my marriage, my home, my career. But more than that, I lost you. I lost my soul when I chose money over my parents. They let silence stretch, processing this unexpected development. Outside, snow began falling again, thick flakes visible in the porch light's glow. What do you want from us? Harold finally asked. Nothing, Patricia said. I came to apologize, to see if you were all right. Marcus refused to tell the FBI where you'd gone. One of his few decent acts. I hired an investigator, followed paper trails. She looked around again. I never imagined you'd land somewhere like this, or that you'd look so. Happy, Eleanor supplied. Healthy, strong, together. Patricia wiped at her eyes. I destroyed your lives and you rebuilt them better. Harold and Eleanor shared a long look, decades of marriage allowing silent communication. Finally, Eleanor spoke. You can stay tonight. The couch folds out. Tomorrow's Christmas, and no one should be alone on Christmas. After that, we'll see. Patricia broke down then, sobbing with the intensity of someone who'd held it in too long. Eleanor didn't comfort her. That trust hadn't been rebuilt, but she didn't turn away either. They shared a quiet Christmas Eve dinner, conversation stilted but civil. Patricia asked about the store, the farmhouse, their new life. They answered simply, without elaborating on the hardships or triumphs. She didn't deserve their full story, not yet. That night, as Patricia slept on the fold-out couch, Harold and Eleanor whispered in their tiny bedroom. Can we forgive her? He asked. I don't know, Eleanor admitted, but we can show mercy. There's a difference. Christmas morning dawned crystal clear, the mountains edged sharp against brilliant blue sky. They opened the store for a few hours, tradition in Deer Creek for last-minute needs and social gathering. Customers brought cookies and greetings, and if they wondered about the sad-eyed woman helping stock shelves, they were too polite to ask. Patricia worked without complaint, learning the register, sweeping floors, making herself useful, watching her interact awkwardly with customers. Eleanor remembered the bright child who'd once charmed everyone she met. Where had that light gone? In the afternoon, they drove Patricia out to see the farmhouse. She gasped at the mountain views, then grew quiet seeing the work they'd accomplished with their own hands. You did all this yourselves? She asked, running her fingers along the porch railing Harold had rebuilt. With help from friends, Harold said. Certain people who showed up when it mattered. The dig wasn't subtle, but Patricia absorbed it without protest. They walked the property, Harold pointing out future plans, the orchard to be restored, gardens to be planted, the barn to be rebuilt someday. Patricia listened like someone hearing a foreign language, trying to understand a world where physical labor created tangible results. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, they stood on the porch in silence. Finally, Patricia spoke. I know I can't undo what I did, can't give back what I took, but could I? Could I maybe earn a second chance? Not to be your daughter again? I know that's gone. But to be someone in your life? Any role you'd allow? Harold looked at Eleanor, seeing his own conflicted feelings reflected. They'd built something beautiful from betrayal's ashes. Did they risk it by allowing Patricia back in, even peripherally? Stay a week, Eleanor said finally. Work in the store, see our life. Then we'll talk about what comes next. Patricia's relief was palpable. Thank you. I won't let you down again. Yes, you will, Harold said bluntly. Everyone does eventually. The question is whether you'll own it and make amends when it happens. The week passed in cautious steps towards something that wasn't quite reconciliation, but might be its foundation. Patricia proved a quick study at the store, and her business background actually helped with inventory management and bookkeeping. She slept on the couch without complaint, ate simple meals with gratitude, and slowly shed layers of the person she'd become. "I don't recognize my life anymore," she admitted one evening as they closed the store. "Everything I valued seems so empty now." "That's the beginning of wisdom," Eleanor said, "knowing what's empty and what's full." New Year's Eve found them at a community potluck in the Deer Creek church basement. Patricia helped serve food, mingling awkwardly with locals who accepted her as Harold and Eleanor's daughter without knowing their history. At midnight, they stood outside watching fireworks someone shot off over the snow-covered meadow. "I have to go back," Patricia said. "There's legal matters to settle, the divorce to finalize. But after that, would it be possible? Could I come back? Rent a room somewhere nearby? Find work? Try to build something real?" Harold and Eleanor considered this. A month ago, they'd have said no immediately. But watching Patricia work honestly, seeing glimpses of who she might become, had softened something. "There's apartments in Whitefish," Eleanor said, "and seasonal work in the tourist industry. But Patricia, this can't be about hiding from your mistakes. It has to be about genuinely starting over." "I understand," Patricia said. "I need to earn my place in the community and in your lives." She left 2 days later, but the goodbye felt different than anticipated. Not an ending, but a pause. They watched her rental car disappear down the mountain road, then return to their life. January and February passed in the rhythms they'd established. Store by day, farmhouse work on weekends when weather allowed. The community continued to embrace them, and their reputation as honest, hardworking folks spread. The store thrived under their management, becoming even more of a gathering place. In March, as spring began its tentative arrival in the mountains, they received a package from Patricia. Inside were documents, a check for $5,000 with a note. "This is all I could recover from what we took. The rest is gone. But I'll keep sending what I can as I rebuild." More surprising were the other contents. Photo albums Patricia had saved from their Cincinnati life, Harold's father's pocket watch somehow recovered, and Eleanor's mother's china teapot carefully wrapped. "She kept these," Eleanor said wonderingly. "Even when she took everything else, she saved these." It didn't erase the betrayal, but it suggested Patricia's actions had been more complex than pure greed. Perhaps she'd known even then that she was destroying something precious and tried to preserve fragments. By April, they'd saved enough to finally properly rewire the farmhouse. The same electrical nephew who'd given them the quote brought his crew, and for 3 days the house buzzed with activity. When they flipped the new breaker panel switches, lights blazed throughout the house for the first time in decades. "Let there be light," Harold said, and Eleanor laughed at the biblical grandeur applied to such a basic amenity. But it did feel miraculous. No more extension cords, no more fire hazards, no more working by lantern light. May brought unexpected news. Mabel called from Missoula. Roy had passed peacefully in his sleep. They closed the store for 2 days to attend the funeral, where Mabel introduced them as the folks who saved our store and gave us peace about leaving. "You gave us a future when we thought we had none," Eleanor told her. "The debt is ours." Returning to Deer Creek, they found the store's front porch filled with flowers, casseroles, and notes from community members. The gesture moved them to tears. This was what Patricia and Marcus had never understood. Wealth wasn't numbers in an account, but connections between people, trust built through presence and reliability. As their first Montana summer arrived, Harold and Eleanor stood on their farmhouse porch surveying their domain. The house, while still a work in progress, was livable and charming. Gardens had been started where Mary Whitman's once bloomed. The orchard trees were pruned and showing new growth. "We should have a party," Eleanor said suddenly. "A celebration. Invite everyone who's helped us, show off what we've accomplished together." Harold loved the idea. They spent weeks planning, preparing food, and finishing last-minute projects. The appointed Saturday arrived perfect. Clear skies, warm sun, and a breeze carrying the scent of wild roses. People came from throughout the valley. Ernest brought his nephew and the plumber who'd helped. The organic farming couple contributed fresh vegetables. Mabel drove from Missoula with her daughter. Even the contractor Harold had worked for brought his family. curious to see the project Harold talked about constantly. They toured the house and grounds, shared a potluck feast on tables made from sawhorses and reclaimed lumber. And as evening approached, someone produced a guitar. Songs rose into the twilight. Old folk songs everyone knew, harmonies rough but heartfelt. "Speech," someone called, and Harold found himself pushed forward. He looked at the assembled faces, people who'd become friends, neighbors who'd become family. Eleanor stood beside him, her hand in his, both of them weathered by the year's trials, but stronger for it. "A year and a half ago," Harold began, "Eleanor and I were facing homelessness. Our children had stolen our life savings. We had nothing but each other and a car that barely ran. Then we inherited this place, broken down, abandoned, forgotten. Kinda like us." Chuckles from the crowd. "But understanding, too. We could have given up a dozen times. The work was too hard, the money too tight, our bodies too old. But you all wouldn't let us. You shared your skills, your knowledge, your friendship. You made us part of this place." He paused, emotion thickening his voice. "They say you can't go home again, but we learned something different. Sometimes you have to lose your home to find where you truly belong. This farmhouse, this community, all of you. You're our home now, and we're grateful beyond words." The applause was warm and genuine. As the party continued around them, Harold and Eleanor slipped away to their favorite spot by the stream. The water gurgled its ancient song while the last light faded from the peaks. "No regrets?" Eleanor asked. "None," Harold said firmly. "Oh, I wish our children had been different people. I wish we'd had an easier path. But this life, Ellie, it's good. We're needed here. We're useful. We're home." A car's headlights swept across the meadow, unusual for the late hour. They walked back to find Patricia climbing out of a dusty sedan, looking uncertain but determined. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know I should have called, but I was afraid you'd tell me not to come. I've settled everything back east. Divorce is final. Legal issues resolved. I've got a job interview Monday at the Whitefish Resort. I wanted you to know I'm serious about starting over here." Harold and Eleanor exchanged glances. Their guests were watching with polite curiosity. This was a test not just of Patricia, but of the life they'd built. Could it accommodate forgiveness? Could strength include mercy? "There's food left," Eleanor said finally, "and people you should meet if you're going to live in this valley." Patricia's eyes filled with tears, but she simply nodded and followed them toward the gathering. Ernest was the first to extend his hand in welcome, followed by others. The community that had embraced Harold and Eleanor would give their daughter a chance. Verdict suspended pending her actions. As the evening wound down and guests departed with hugs and promises to visit soon, the three of them cleared dishes in comfortable silence. Patricia worked without being asked, falling into rhythms remembered from childhood. "The house looks amazing," she said, "like something from a magazine, but better, more real." "It's been hard work," Eleanor said. "Hardest thing we've ever done. The most rewarding, too," Harold added. Patricia dried plates thoughtfully. "Could I? Would you show me? Teach me? I've never built anything with my hands, never grown food or fixed broken things. I don't know how to do any of what you've done here." It was the most honest thing she'd said, acknowledging the gulf between their worlds. Harold considered her request. "Tomorrow's Sunday. We're putting in fence posts for the garden expansion. You can help if you want." "I want," Patricia said quickly. "I want to learn everything." They worked side by side the next day, Patricia soft-handed and clumsy, but determined. By afternoon, she had blisters and sunburn, dirt under her manicured nails, and a smile that looked genuine for the first time since arriving. "It's hard," she said, examining her raw palms. "Most worthwhile things are," Eleanor replied. "The question is whether you'll show up tomorrow when they hurt worse." Patricia did show up, and the next day, and the next. She got the job in Whitefish, found a small apartment, and spent her days off at the farmhouse learning skills her parents had tried to teach in childhood, but she'd been too privileged to value. Spring turned to summer, and the gardens Eleanor had planted bloomed in abundance. The renovated farmhouse drew visitors who'd heard about the couple who'd transformed heartbreak into hope. Harold began teaching woodworking to local youth, passing on skills to a generation that desperately needed them. Eleanor's preserves and baked goods became sought after at the Deer Creek store and Whitefish Farmers Market. One evening in August, as they sat on the porch watching sunset paint the mountains, Patricia asked the question they'd all been dancing around. "Do you forgive me?" Harold and Eleanor sat quietly, considering. The betrayal would always be part of their story, a scar that had reshaped everything. But scars could strengthen as well as martyr. "We're learning to," Eleanor said finally. "Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a choice you make daily, sometimes hourly. We're choosing to try. That's more than I deserve," Patricia said softly. "Yes," Harold agreed, "but mercy usually is." As stars emerged in the darkening sky, 3 generations sat together on a porch built by hand from salvaged lumber. The farmhouse that had been abandoned was now filled with life. The couple who'd been discarded had become pillars of their community. The daughter who'd chosen greed was learning to choose differently. It wasn't the life any of them had planned. Harold and Eleanor should have been comfortable retirees in Cincinnati, enjoying grandchildren and the fruits of decades of labor. Patricia should have been a successful professional, not a resort waitress learning humility. The farmhouse should have crumbled back to earth. Samuel Whitman's hermit legacy fading to nothing, but plans were just human attempts to control an uncontrollable universe. What mattered was how you responded when plans shattered, whether you let breakage define you or reformed yourself from the pieces. "Tell me about winter here," Patricia said. "What should I expect?" Harold and Eleanor smiled at each other, remembering their own first winter fears. Then they began sharing hard-won wisdom about snow loads and water pipes, about community support and inner resilience, about finding warmth in the coldest seasons through connections that money couldn't buy. The story could end here, with reconciliation on a summer evening. But life doesn't wrap up neatly, and their journey continued with new challenges and victories. Patricia slowly earned her place in the community and her parents' trust. The farmhouse welcomed other lost souls who needed shelter and second chances. The store became a model for rural sustainability, drawing visitors who wanted to learn how Harold and Eleanor had created abundance from abandonment. Years later, when Harold's back finally forced true retirement and Eleanor's arthritis limited her baking, they were able to step back, knowing they'd built something lasting. The farmhouse stood strong, maintained now by younger hands they'd trained. The store thrived under new management they'd mentored. The gardens fed multiple families from seeds they'd planted. But most importantly, they'd proven that betrayal didn't have to be the end of the story. That 2 people deemed useless by society and their own children could create value beyond measure. That a broken-down farmhouse could become a symbol of resurrection, and that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born to. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the community threw them a surprise party in the Deer Creek Church. Patricia gave a speech that moved hardened ranchers to tears, thanking her parents for showing her what actually mattered in life. The young couple who'd bought the store presented them with a plaque naming them Deer Creek Citizens of the Year. Harold's woodworking students displayed furniture they'd built using his techniques, but the moment that meant most came quietly as they walked through their restored farmhouse that evening. Every room held memories of struggle and triumph. Every board they'd placed, every wall they'd painted, every garden bed they'd dug spoke of resilience and determination. "We did it, Ellie," Harold said, pulling her close in the kitchen where they'd first despaired at the magnitude of work needed. "We really did it." "We did," she agreed, "but not alone, never alone." Through the windows, the mountains stood eternal, witnesses to their transformation. The betrayal that had driven them from Cincinnati had become the gift that brought them home, not to a place they'd known, but to a place that knew them, valued them, needed them. In the end, that's what mattered. Not the money stolen or the trust broken, but the life built from the rubble. Not the children who'd abandoned them, but the community that embraced them. Not the farmhouse as it had been, broken and forgotten, but as it stood now, a testament to the power of refusing to surrender. Harold and Eleanor Whitman had been discarded like worn-out tools, but they'd proven that with enough determination, worn tools could still build something beautiful, and in building it, they'd rebuilt themselves. The story continues every day in places like Deer Creek, where people choose community over commodity, where neighbors still help neighbors, and where two elderly people transformed catastrophe into triumph. It continues in every renovated room of that Montana farmhouse, in every jar of preserves sold at the store, in every young person who learned that working with your hands creates more than objects. It creates character. Most of all, it continues in the truth that betrayal doesn't have to be the final word. That sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what really matters. And that home isn't a place you're from, but a place that makes you whole. Harold and Eleanor found that place in an abandoned farmhouse on 40 Montana acres. They found it in the faces of neighbors who became friends, in the work of their hands, in the choice to begin again when beginning seemed impossible. They found it in each other, the love that had sustained them through 50 years, only growing stronger when tested by fire. The farmhouse stands today, no longer abandoned but alive with purpose. Visitors who don't know its history see only a charming homestead with spectacular mountain views. But those who know see more. They see proof that broken things can be made beautiful, that discarded people have immense value, and that sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the best life. In a filing cabinet in the Deer Creek store, there's a folder containing the original eviction notice from Cincinnati, the deed to 40 acres in Montana, and a photograph of Harold and Eleanor on their rebuilt porch. It's labeled simply, New Beginnings, and it serves as a reminder that every ending is also an opening. If you have the courage to walk through the door, the Whitmans did more than walk through. They rebuilt the entire house, and in doing so, they rebuilt themselves, their family, and their faith in the fundamental goodness that survives even the deepest betrayal. Their story reminds us that we're never too old to start over, never too broken to be mended, and never too abandoned to find home. Sometimes we just need the courage to pick up a hammer and begin. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of resilience and redemption. If Harold and Eleanor's story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more powerful stories of human triumph. Click on one of the 2 stories on your screen right now for another amazing tale of courage against all odds.